It's now time to hear from our presenting sponsor. This portion of the program is produced by Qualcomm. Please welcome on stage Susie Armstrong, Senior Vice President of Engineering with Qualcomm, joined by Vincent Voci, Cyber Policy Director with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Please join them in welcoming.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks so much to Susie and Qualcomm for sponsoring today's event and this really important and timely conversation. I don't think that there's probably a more technology and security-related conversation that's as important as the development, deployment of fifth-generation wireless and wireline telecommunications policy here in the U.S. So thank you to Susie, thanks to the Hill Events and Steve Clements for having us here today. Before we get into the mobility discussion, the theme for today, I think one of the really interesting things that you were showing us backstage was this phone, the first web-enabled cell phone. So when you developed this in 1997, do you have any idea of what you were going to unleash?
No. In 1997, we were working on voice over cellular, and I made an observation that it was just a digital link, and being from the computer background, the internet background, we decided we could use this to connect to the internet. And so at the CTIA show in 1997, we actually surfed the net on this little tiny screen. And in some ways, this was probably actually the first smartphone. And we had no idea at the time what was going to happen to the industry. We thought it was a cool thing to be able to surf the net from your phone. We had no idea that we would have downloadable apps and an app store, things like Uber. But I think it kind of goes to show you the nature of innovation is you put this investment in, and you have clever ideas, and from there, people build the most amazing new inventions on it.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is we've gone through this journey of communications technologies through the second generation, 3G, 4G, and now into 5G is, what's the next big thing? What's the next big connectivity? What societal changes will be unleashed with this new technology? We'll get into some of the use cases, autonomous vehicles and smart cities in a little bit, but what might change society with fifth-generation technologies?
One thing we see with the big difference in what we see with 5G versus 4G and some of the newer, the older technologies is, in the past with 4G, it's pretty much connecting people with their phones. And with 5G, you have the opportunity with the low power and with the high bandwidth and the capacity and the low response time to connect things, the Internet of Things, to connect devices, sensors, sensors in roads, cars, healthcare. And so that never before has this been possible on a broad scale, and now with 5G it is.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest use cases for 5G is in connected vehicles. And can you talk a little bit about CV2X?
CV2X doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Cellular vehicle to everything connectivity. And so this is the piece of 5G in the standard that is that pertains to automotive, and there's a lot of discussion about autonomous driving vehicles and such, but what we really see, especially in the short and the midterm, is huge advances in safety. For example, it turns out that most accidents are due to limited reaction time. People don't have enough time, drivers don't have enough time to react to kids in the road, et cetera. And with 5G and related technologies and instrumented roads, you have an opportunity to, and augmented reality, you have an opportunity to have drivers, it's very, very real, actually see through the car in front of them. And in combination with those connected roads, you have an opportunity to have a greatly increased reaction time when something comes out into the street. And So this is not terribly far in the future, and again, it's I think something that benefits smart cities and benefits every driver and every pedestrian and every cyclist like me out there.
Yeah, and just pulling on that thread a little bit more, people now are familiar with getting in your car and maybe connecting to the internet for either wireless calling or maybe connecting to Pandora or some sort of video streaming. What might a connected car in the future connect to, and what's Qualcomm's role in developing those technologies to provide that interface?
So Qualcomm, of course, we do all the R&D and the long-term research in the 5G, but we also are technology neutral. We do work in Wi-Fi, we do work in Bluetooth, and so a connected car, if you look at a car these days, and certainly going forward in the future, there's a lot of communications both within the car and then to components outside of the car.
Smart city sensors, or as you said, looking around vehicles.
Right, looking at roads, real-time monitoring of the weather conditions.
So, and pivoting now to, we're in Washington, D.C., policy is a part of the conversation. 5G has been the topic of the year, I would say. But from now, what we hear is that, we're at a policy inflection point, and oftentimes 5G is mentioned in national security conversations specific to high-risk vendors and such. But for lawmakers and policymakers that are working on 5G specific issues, from an engineer's point of view, what is needed to spur next wave of innovations related to 5G?
So critical to 5G or any other advanced technology is support from the policies for the innovation and R&D. And I cannot overemphasize that. Something like 5G is, and advanced wireless communications is so complicated that we've probably been working on some of the advances there for 10 years of research. And that's 10 years of very risky research and investment. And so policies that support R&D in both private and public spaces, and policies that support a strong patent system are absolutely critical to the U.S. maintaining a foothold in creating and deploying these kinds of advanced technologies.
And if I could offer one more, maybe ask you to put some thoughts into is also spectrum allocation as well.
Yes.
For 5G, not only the sub-6 spectrum, but also millimeter wave and all aspects. So where does Qualcomm view government's role in providing more spectrum?
The more spectrum, the better. There's a lot of conversation right now in DC about millimeter wave, and is it only for people in cities, and I think that's very far from the truth. For broad adoption of any wireless communication technology, you want as much spectrum in different bands as possible. The millimeter wave spectrum, which is traditionally thought to be very unsuitable for cellular communications, and that's largely what we observed in doing research in how you make it suitable for cellular communications. It's in that millimeter wave spectrum that you get a lot of the more localized, very high speed types of applications, but we certainly would like to see broad allocation of sub-6 gigahertz spectrum as well. Again, it's not an either-or situation for 5G to become a reality for every industry and every set of people you want. And I
asked you earlier, what are some questions that policymakers are not asking Qualcomm and others in the 5G ecosystem that they should be asking? For example, or do we have enough diversity in the marketplace, and how might the policies that are developed both here in DC and in capitals around the globe might foster an ecosystem that can support a greater breadth and depth of innovators and technologists out there?
Yeah, and you know, I spent my career mostly as the lone woman in the room. And Qualcomm and I think most of the tech companies have wonderful programs in STEM, trying to get people, not just women, but people that are underrepresented into these areas. And it's not just a good thing to do, it's an economic imperative. If you don't bring women and other folks into the room, you're losing out on lots of GDP and lots of ideas, and you're leaving talent and money on the table. So we're particularly passionate about increasing that STEM pipeline.
And looking forward to connected and smarter cities, how are 5G technologies going to enable smarter grids, smarter traffic systems, smarter water systems? What do you envision as some of the technologies that might enable greater not only efficiencies but also safety and security measures?
Okay, I'm very excited to see the next panel as well on the smart cities, and it was very interesting to hear the transportation folks speak. So 5G, again, really enables the Internet of Things, and those things typically are connected sensors. So if you look at smart cities and you have, you know, sensors on your grid, sensors for your water systems, those are sensors that collect the data that help you run them efficiently, to help you run them safely. There certainly are security aspects to it, and I think for full adoption, we need to face the security aspects very directly. And I think, you know, from an engineering point of view, I think that involves, for each of, whether it's transportation or healthcare or smart cities and smart grid, that means participating in standards for that kind of cyber security. It means testing and really taking that work very proactively, because without secure systems, there'll be a very chilling effect to actually deploying them.
I think one of the most important things for public and private sectors to tackle off is this convergence of IT and OT systems, the deployment of 5G technologies, and it's just the numbers of things that are going to be connected to the internet is a really important issue.
Yes, if you look at the global communication system, it really is a piece. We talk about, you know, roads being infrastructure, and the global communication system really is a piece of critical, if not one of the most critical pieces of infrastructure that we have. And Michelle from Los Angeles was talking about the convergence. She sees transportation as the convergence of energy and transportation. And I think with the addition of the communication systems, you really have convergence of all of these critical infrastructures into one.
Well, thank you very much, Susie. Really enjoyed the dialogue. Let's give her and the Qualcomm team a big thank you.
Thank you.